Welcome to the White Wisteria Academy series, Interview with an Expert, the recruiter's side of recruitment with Dan Norris. A relationship with a recruiter is complicated, and I know that a lot of CRAs have burning questions to recruiters, and the two groups don't really understand each other. So I wanted to talk to Dan Norris to shed some light on these areas so that we are better equipped next time we are looking for a new position. Dan has just under 10 years of recruitment experience within the tech and IT sector. Currently a sales manager with Xcede, which is a part of TechStream Group. Dan is a passionate recruiter with a strong focus on client delivery and candidate clarity within the recruitment process. Dan, thank you so much for joining us.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
So Dan, I want to dive into the deep end. So in my experience, several times I had the impression that the recruiter isn't really listening to what roles I am looking for. So they would be just simply sending me any roles that they had going, even if they were actually in the contrast to what I said that I was looking for. Can we talk about the recruiter's perspective? What are the recruiter's goals?
So ultimately, the recruiter's goal is to fill the jobs that they might have on board with them at the moment. I think what's obviously a good thing to know is recruiters have markets that they work in. So as a candidate, the most important thing before you engage with the recruiter is you understand, are you working with a recruiter that works within your market? You don't really want to find yourself working with a generalist recruiter. You want to find yourself someone that's, for CRA particularly, working in that kind of world. When a recruiter comes to working with clients, they will, a lot of them, not be very reactive necessarily, proactive. They'll be more reactive. So they'll have maybe a market that they work, or they might be a bit more generalist. And if they're generalist, that's probably why you might have a bit of a scattergun approach, and you might be getting sent jobs that aren't what you would necessarily be looking for. So it's very important to try and find a recruiter that works specifically in the market that you're looking for. So off the back of that, their goal is, really it's to make as much money as possible. And that is by way of placements. Recruiters, there is maybe a bit of a misconception, and some people might think recruiters are just there to change people's lives. It's a sales environment. So finding that right person, that right recruiter, is extremely important.
Right. So basically, you would advocate that we find that recruiter and then establish a relationship so that they kind of know more about what we're looking for and then kind of sending us the right offers.
Yeah, exactly. And it's very easy to see a role advertised by a recruiter, and you apply for it because you know that you're right for that role, and then you don't get a response, and then maybe your CV is then put onto their database and you hit a mail shot because they're working a different type of role. So recruiters will, if they're good, will work a market, and they will have a database of CRAs maybe, or data scientists, or if it's software developers, and they should work to that market. Unfortunately, sometimes you will get caught in the crossfire of other opportunities. And that's just because a lot of these companies have large databases nowadays, and they try to use that as their free marketing.
Yeah, I definitely have noticed something like that. I just couldn't quite place it, but yeah. But I want to back up a little bit. So you mentioned the proactive recruiter. Can you talk more about what a proactive recruiter would be doing differently than, let's say, a reactive recruiter?
So a proactive recruiter will naturally take good candidates to market.
Mhm.
A reactive recruiter will wait for the client to send them a job and then
Mhm.
probably live on a job board, or
Mhm.
might send a mail shot on LinkedIn, or a mail shot to their database, hence why some people then get picked up for
Mhm.
jobs that they're not specifically correct for.
Mhm.
A reactive recruiter will have a vertically led market of candidates that they know specifically fit that job role.
Mhm.
Um, and I think this then leads the way into having relationships with the right recruiters.
Mhm.
So reactive is what we call in the market a maybe a bit of a farmer,
Mhm.
which is someone that just waits and churns over and
Mhm.
looks after what comes to them. A
Mhm.
reactive is very much someone that is a forefront of connectivity with clients. Is someone that's quite enthusiastic about their market.
So
So
that's the proactive one, right?
that's the proactive
That's what
recruiter.
we want. Yeah.
That's who you want to speak to. That's where
Mhm.
that's who you want to build relationships with.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay, well, that sounds great. I didn't know that there are these types of recruiters, but I think I've never actually really would be able to kind of tell the difference. I just knew that something was not right, but yeah, that makes total sense now. So thank you for straightening it out in my head. um, so kind of continuing on with this, why some recruiters would just make a decision based on a candidate's CV, whether they can kind of go forward with the recruitment process rather than giving a candidate a chance to actually meet with the recruiter or with the interviewer, sorry.
So there is a saying that, and it's a humanization of not just the recruiter but hiring managers alike. People don't tend to look at CVs if
Mhm.
they have a large amount of CVs to go through
Mhm.
for maybe longer than 10 to 15 seconds per time.
Mhm.
So,
Wow, that's very short.
and it's fast because as you can imagine, if you put a job advert online at the moment and you put that to a job advertising website, and they get 400 applications through
Mhm.
within, and it's
Wow.
very likely that this just happen quite regularly. And maybe the CRA market particularly is a bit smaller. Having worked
Mhm.
CRA stuff before, I know that it can be quite a busy market in itself.
Yeah.
You don't generally have time. If you spent 1 minute on 400 CVs, that's 400 minutes out of your day.
Mhm.
You know,
Wow.
that's hours on hours on just looking
Mhm.
at CVs. That's not servicing your client.
Yeah.
That isn't then necessarily serving the candidate particularly
Mhm.
well. And then this streams itself back as to why it's important to have a relationship with the right people. But
Mhm.
the way that you can change that is by leading your CV to be achievement led. Or
Mhm.
what I do
Okay.
recommend is, if you find a job that you apply for but you don't get any feedback, and
Mhm.
the recruiter decides not to put you forward,
Yeah.
you should always
Mhm.
try and call
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
office, because people are going to naturally give you more time on the phone.
Right.
Um,
Okay, that's a
if you
good tip.
can get it, and it's hard to do that. It is, a lot of recruiters do, I won't lie, calls do get screened to an extent.
Mhm.
And if it's a name of someone, and it's, you know, they know that that might be a person applying, they
Mhm.
might not take the call, but
Uh-huh.
it's worth trying, because it's tough, because as you can imagine, if there's 400 applications, 35 people might be trying to call them within that first hour, or
Mhm.
over the course of an hour. And
Mhm.
there is quite a lot that goes on behind the scenes around, because a good recruiter won't always only be working one position. They'll have
Uh-huh.
maybe 3, 4, or 5
Mhm.
positions
Mhm.
on at any one time.
Mhm. So I guess that would also explain why sometimes when, let's say, a candidate CV isn't going to be put forward and the recruiter doesn't really let you know in any sort of way, then just call and trying to find
Just
out.
call. Um, the recruiter can't, if you apply online or you apply through the website, it's not it's not possible for the recruiter to reply to every single
Hmm.
candidate or application
Yeah.
that they weren't successful.
Mhm.
They should, if by law or by the REC regulations, there
Mhm.
should be a disclaimer on an advert to say that if you haven't been contacted within 7 or 14 days,
Mhm.
unfortunately, you've been unsuccessful on this occasion.
Right.
That
Yeah.
disclaimer should be there. I don't think a lot of people know that, but it should be there.
Yeah, I guess it's an excellent point, because then once the candidate knows, then nobody's really wondering and thinking, oh, I wonder where that CV is at. Just you wait, and then if you don't hear, then that means this. Then you don't really need the recruiter to tell you this. You kind of
No,
just will
no,
figure
no.
it out.
And we understand the frustration from the candidates that you might not be getting feedback, as when we speak to a client and we send over CVs, and trust me, it happens regularly. The client doesn't give you feedback, so
Right.
we have to then try and humanize our approach back to the individual that's looking for work.
Yeah.
Understand that you might be stressed because you're looking for an opportunity and you thought that you were right, but why am I not being considered? So we're not. We do understand that happens as well.
Yeah. Okay. At least we will know going forward. So for the next topic, I want to talk about the old conundrum of needing the experience to get the job, and also needing the job to get the experience. So for example, in our industry, sometimes we would see a role opening for a project management position. And while we hit most of the skills necessary, we may not have an actual project management experience managing a study, because that's not something that would come our way in our position as a CRA. So given this, how would I kind of convince a recruiter to pitch my CV for that project management role, if I believe that I am a great fit for it because of transferable skills?
So if you were a business analyst that wanted to be a project manager, and it was a prerequisite of the client that the project manager had, or the candidate had a certain amount of time and proof of delivery as a project manager, 9 times out of 10, you're not going to get put forward. If the recruiter has done their due diligence with the client, and is maybe an occasion where they said, actually, we might look at these profiles, then you might get lucky. I think it's hard. You have to, as the individual, put yourself in the same shoes to say, if you were to hire someone in a position that you needed, but someone sent themselves forward that wasn't quite right, and just off the base of the CV, would you hire that person? Probably not. So what's really good is to be able to adapt your CV to make it lead in that direction. I think you've got 2 ways of looking at that as well. If you're a contractor or a permanent employee, if you're a contractor, the likelihood of you getting a position that you haven't been before is very unlikely. Because 9 times out of 10, the client wants the contractor to hit the ground running, and they need to have that experience. If you're a permanent member of staff, you've got more of an argument to your case to be considered. But I don't want to. As a recruiter, especially as a recruiter, it's always going to be harder to convince a recruiter that you can do a job that on your CV or in your experience says that you haven't done. A talent acquisition that sits on site with the client might be a bit easier, but as a recruiter, I think you'll always find that very hard. I'll be honest with you. So it's either upskilling, training on personal development. So if you want to become a project manager, have you gone out and done a Prince 2 practitioner or a Lean Six Sigma process course or a P2P project management course? Of course, this is just to that particular skill set. So I would recommend that. Personal development is always so important.
Yeah, and then you need to also kind of be able to sell these personal development courses that you've done. So definitely put them in the CV.
Exactly, and not everyone's a natural salesperson. Not everyone wants to have to sell themselves. That's really, really hard. However, I always say to people that everyone has a passion, whether it be trains, football, dancing, ice skating. And whenever you ask someone about that passion that they have, no matter who they are, they can talk about that more fluidly than they can other things.
Yeah.
So as someone that's job seeking, if you've gone and done personal development, naturally that will probably be a passion. So lean on that and speak to the recruiter or the talent acquisition and let them know that this is something that you're truly passionate about. And again, going back to humanization, people will respond to that.
Yeah, lead with passion always works.
Absolutely.
So I want to talk about money. Why do recruiters ask for your current salary, and how to negotiate a better salary?
So salary is, it's always because the client will have an expectation of what they want to pay the individual. I think when a recruiter asks it to you, it's because they're working to a budget. And especially for permanent work, if, for instance, you have a role that's being advertised at £65,000 per year, and you might only be on £45,000 a year, the client is always going to want to know what that person's salary was previously. So in response, if you're not comfortable telling them your salary, then I would always say respond with an expectation of what you would look. Because no one leaves a job to stay on the same money. Everyone looks for an increase. Everyone wants to, leverage themselves at slightly higher. Otherwise, why would you stay? Because it would be a sideways move. Unless you were in a toxic environment and you wanted to go somewhere else, there would be no point. So from a recruiter's viewpoint, they're not saying it to be intrusive, to doubt what you can do. They're saying it because the client will be murmuring a amount that they expect.
Right. Okay, that sounds good. I guess it's always safe to just say what your expectation is, because does it really matter that much what you're on at the moment? If you just won't make a move for whatever you would be happy with, then just let's not waste each other's time, right?
Yeah.
So over the course of my career, I have learned that I should always ask what are the next steps during the interview. What is the one thing that you think is super easy to do and everyone should do in order to have a better interview?
To have a better interview, I think you always just need to be very personable within your interview and professional in your approach. And the one thing I do always say to my candidates to ask is, within the interview or at the end of the interview, is there anything that the hiring manager feels that you could have answered better? Or it's always important to have questions for them afterwards. When you ask a question, is there anything that you could have asked better? If you feel there is something, they will then maybe say that to you. And if they do say that to you, you get to have an open discussion, and it shows an adaptation to circumstance. And generally people like that. So I think that's a really good question you could always ask.
Yeah, definitely. I like that. I think it also shows that you are open to feedback. And I think sometimes when people want to hire somebody, they may be thinking, how is that person really reacting to feedback? Are they going to be cooperation? Is the collaboration going to be smooth, or are they not going to be implementing any sort of feedback well? So yeah, that's a great tip to implement, I think. So yeah, before we wrap up, can you recommend a good book that would help us in the interview process?
I think a lot about winning jobs or sealing opportunities through after application and interview. It's very much it's about your background and your past, but also a large amount about influence. And a book, it's a very popular book, and it's one that I still self-read myself, is How to Make Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie.
Okay, that's great.
Very, very popular, very easy to find. It's quite an old book, but it's all around perceiving perceptions and understanding how people expect you to behave in certain situations.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
it's a self-help confidence building book, but which I
Mhm.
think is very good to take into interviews.
Okay, excellent. That's brilliant. We will also link that book in the comments as well. That was excellent. Thank you so much, Dan, for this insight and tips and advice.
No problems. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
I hope that this session answered some of the burning questions for you. It definitely did for me. So to summarize the main points that we discussed, adjust your CV for every single role that you apply for. But also, very important, make sure that your main key strengths are visible to the hiring manager right on the first glance, so on the first page of the CV. When a recruiter asks for your current salary, if you don't feel comfortable sharing that information, feel free to always answer with "my expected salary is," because you're not obliged to give them the exact number you are on at the moment. Then a very interesting point that Dan made was the difference between proactive and a reactive recruiter type. So I would say interview your recruiter. When you are looking for a position, reach out to a few recruiters and then ask them questions to determine whether they are proactive or a reactive recruiter. So for example, a proactive recruiter is more likely to propose your CV even if you don't match 100% of the recruitment of the requirements on the job description. They will communicate to you if you need to adjust your CV. They do their market research. They have a relationship with a hiring manager. They have made a point of talking to the hiring manager to understand exactly what are the things that a hiring manager is looking for. And they know your market value. So in case you yourself value yourself below your market value, they will tell you. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope that this was useful to you and it gave you tips that you can implement and answered some questions that you had about how recruiters operate. You can find more tips in our monthly newsletter, so make sure that you sign up on our website, www.whitewisteriaacademy.com, and follow us on social media. We are on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram at White Wisteria Academy. Thank you so much and speak to you soon.